If there's one question I get asked more than any other, more even than, can I ask you a question? That question would have to be, Mark, how do you capture the scenic beauty of regional Victoria through landscape photography? Well, today we're going to try and answer that question. It was time to escape the urban cacophony and discover the pastoral charms of rural life. So it was goodbye to a cold, wintry Perth. Because I was on a quest. A quest to capture the beauty of the Victorian landscape, Victorian here being the countryside west of Melbourne, Australia, not the Canadian island or the bleak topography of 19th century industrial England. The flux capacitor of my DeLorean was still in the shop, so that one would have to wait. But this was an adventure nonetheless and involved significant hardship and discomfort. Okay, I may be overstating that a bit, and no, I wasn't stressed, but we were flying Jetstar. If Qantas's image has been somewhat tarnished by its post-COVID policies of playing poor and screwing customers while reporting record profits and $24 million executive bonuses, then this is their budget brand, where you can't carry on anything larger than a handbag, and you have to mortgage your house in order to pay for a cup of coffee. Notice how they are even too cheap to paint over the bare aluminium of the fuselage, other than for a couple of accents in that specific orange colour that looks cool and you always think is going to suit you until you actually try that shirt on. But I survived. I'm not sure if the worst part was the flight itself or watching a 78-year-old Harrison Ford being too old for that shit in the latest Indiana Jones movie, but in not much longer than the 2.5 hours runtime, we had landed, and it was a case of, well, grabbing them. The cases, that is, and then picking up a rental car and hitting the road. So this video will probably just be the first part of a series as I wended my way through regional Victoria, through the Great Ocean Road, through the Grampians and then back to Melbourne. Lots of photos, lots of head scratching and lots of tedious monologue as I try to capture the rustic beauty of this great land. It seemed merciful to break the experience up. Not that there was much to see. At first, the grim grey drizzle of Perth gave way to the grim grey drizzle of Melbourne. One suburb stretched into another, almost indistinguishable except for the occasionally different coloured roof of the domestic boxes that lined the freeway like plaque clinging to the hardened arteries of Victoria's transportation tributaries. Unfortunately, I was the one that was driving, so there was no point in me sulkily complaining, are we there yet? I mean, it's not like I could turn around, tell myself to be quiet, eat my sandwich, or I'd give myself something real to whinge about. There was the occasional unique natural scenery, such as this fascinating outcrop of steel frame structures that is obviously the outer suburban equivalent of an ancient druidic temple. Small houses scattered around it, eager to bathe in the ethereal green glow that must emanate from it once the sun goes down. No doubt the residents worship at the foot of it like some Mayan villagers constructing their dwellings at the base of a volcano, eager to reap the beneficence of the gods as they plough their fertile furrows and throw the occasional goat or virgin into the crater in the hope of a good harvest. In this case, I can only assume that they bask in the crackle of static as they sit on their front porches enjoying the soft sensation of their hair standing on end as they prepare their ceremonial meal of Victoria Bitter and the charred carcasses of the crows that hurl themselves at the live cables in their quest to rejoin the great sky raven. Given the number of teenagers pushing prams around Geelong shopping centres, I can only assume that rustling up enough virgins to make a good sacrifice can be a challenge in this part of the world, but the new gods of electricity have their own source of human capital, powering our oversized TVs and sucking our brains out through our eyeballs as we binge watch episodes of Vanderpump Rules. Soon though, the frisson of driving through electromagnetic fields gave way to the rolling plains of real fields, and the grey clouds started to break, allowing for what turned out to be one of the best sunsets of the trip. If I'd arrived earlier, you might have been treated to some amazing photography, but by the time we approached our destination, the light was failing and I was just able to pull over to the side of the road and capture one image before the final stray photons of the day were extinguished by the encroaching night. Not too much to say about this photo really, a view of Aireys Inlet from a roadside park. I took out my camera, set the exposure to manual and handheld at 180th of a second at f6.3 and an ISO of 1000, training my eyes on the horizon and panning across to try and capture as much of the vista as possible in a panorama stitched in Photoshop. Nothing special, let's be honest. I'm probably one of a million people who have taken this shot before, but the light was good and I'm happy enough with the outcome. Perhaps not a portfolio piece, but that's not what these videos are about anyway. It's tough because the interest in the picture is probably in the lighthouse and the rock, but I wasn't close enough to fill the frame with them, and even if I was, part of the appeal comes from the sky and the final rays reflected from the water to draw you in. Unfortunately, the lack of foreground interest and the fact that the main subject is so small in the frame makes this one a bit of an also-ran. But it was one photo in the bag, and I checked into our accommodation, satisfied that whatever else happened, I had something to show for the visit. The motel obviously had a thing for arches and the colour peach that was matched in chintzy perfection by the presentation of the Gravlax salmon toast with lemon dill cream of Le Comptoir restaurant down the road. On the way back, I spotted this curious artifact of the 20th century standing resolutely by a couple of bins and went to sleep that night with a fierce determination that I would get up before dawn and capture the sunrise.
Gentlemen to bed. Gentlemen to bed before we leave at first light.
And yes, I can hear your sarcastic snickering from here, but in fact I did just that. Yes, I know the things I do for this channel. I'm not a morning person, obviously, and I'm not a seascape photography or a tripod user either. In this case, though, I was resolute that I would make art out of the sunrise. Now, I've had those delusions before, and they've usually been met with disappointment. Skies tuned to the colour of a dead TV channel, just grey evenings turned upside down, and yes, there were two literary allusions in that last sentence. This time I set up my tripod in the most amazing conditions imaginable. The air was still, the dull grey blue was ignited by the sputtering pink dawn, and it started to resemble a Mills and Boon cover more than Howard's End or Neuromancer. I was set up around the other side of the Spit Point Lighthouse than the evening before, and was able to include a bit of foreground this time. I shot 2 images, both at 1.3 seconds, f9 and ISO 100. Now, the first of these was at 33mm to capture the full scene, including the lighthouse and whatever this scrubby vegetation is. The second was a bit tighter at 53mm, focusing much more on the inlet, but with the grasses at the bottom of the image. Let me know which one you think is the better. I'm not sure about either. I do like both of them, but I can't help but feel that the elements tend to compete with each other. I focus stacked to ensure that the photos were sharp throughout the layers of foreground right through to background. With this first one, there's just too much to look at. You've got the lighthouse, the rocks and the vegetation in different parts of the frame, which kind of makes my eyes bounce around a bit as I try to work out where to look. It's also quite messy on the left of the image, and I'm in two minds about whether I should just crop it, and if so, where. If I remove those awful twiggy things and the white house to the left, then you're left with the lighthouse perilously close to the edge. And then if I crop out the lighthouse, well then am I removing one of the things that makes this photo interesting? This second image was equally challenging. I think I was so desperate to add some foreground that you've got elements going all the way from the reeds to the horizon, but you're not led there. It's more like the various layers present themselves like hurdles you have to scramble over, like some photographic version of It's a Knockout. The reeds themselves are sharp, but the motion blur gives the foreground kind of a chaotic look. You'll see I cropped it to 16:9 to try and mitigate that, but I don't know. You let me know in the comments below. But this landscape photography is hard. I did move position to try and counter the busyness of the first location, thinking that the shoreline might create a more organic lead into the horizon and sunrise. Nice in theory, but nature really wasn't on my side. The curve of the shoreline didn't really draw you into the scene. It had been raining as well, and the beach was obviously well used, so the sand just looked like a million wet dogs had rolled around in it and disrupted the pristine tranquility of the rest of the scene. Look, I was going for the big vista. I was really trying to avoid cropping closely, but in the end I gave in to my weakness for light minimalist scenes and shot these ones as abstract vignettes to add to the more typical landscape shots. Again, I had an issue with balance in the frame. Even with the beautiful skies, it was hard to counter the dominance of the rocky outcrops. Some were more successful than others, I think, but I didn't have time to really work the scene because it started raining. I'm water soluble, and I also needed to get back to the motel to pack up for the next leg of the journey. But not before I did just a little more scouting around Aireys Inlet, the lighthouse and Sentinel Rock. So there you have it, the first stage of my exploration of regional Victoria and my own experiments in landscape photography. The next stage was to drive along the Great Ocean Road to Port Fairy with even more attempts at trying to capture the wonder of the Victorian coastline. I can't promise you any better photos along the journey, but if you're interested in coming along for the ride, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can at least kick back with the smug satisfaction that your photos would have been better. Let me know what I did wrong in the comments and I'll see you all again. Later.